an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Travelers, Season 2, Episode 3, Jacob. In this episode, the team attempts to find out who is behind the abductions of both themselves and apparently several other teams. I was very surprised that they figure it out. It doesn't go the way anybody hoped. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Michael for commissioning this episode. Guys, it has been 2.5 months since the last Travelers episode. I didn't realize how much I missed this show. When I started watching this episode, I was just like, oh God, there's so much still to happen and so much still to be figured out. I don't think that I checked to see exactly how many seasons there are of this show. I know I've asked this before, but I asked 2.5 months ago, so what can you do? But I feel like what they have built in terms of the backstory potential for what has led to the creation of the director and the changes that have occurred now in the future, all of this is such a huge story that I can't imagine another couple of seasons is going to do the trick in terms of like explaining things. At the same time, maybe they don't need to. Maybe they don't have to explain everything. That's something that I like because of who I am, I tend to like. But there are times when discretion is the better part of storytelling. And leaving it a little bit unclear or to your imagination is maybe the smarter way to go. I feel like this could be a really ripe world for having one of those handbooks that you can find about so many shows where you get a lot of like side information after the fact. The kind of thing that like writers or creators would have for their personal notes but wouldn't find a way to elegantly like involve in the actual script of the show. Anyway, there is just, I every time that I see where an episode is going, they keep surprising me in terms of where they decide to take things and what they choose to focus on. And that's not a complaint at all. I like being surprised and I like being certain in my way that I know where things are going and then proven wrong. But I do wonder about, a lot of the details of where they came from. And I don't really want to go to the future. I don't really want to see where they came from firsthand. Because in some ways, I do think that mystery is good. But I could see them doing that, bringing us there. I don't know how. It seems pretty clear from the way that we have been shown how all of this works. Our team can't go back. So unless it's a flashback and we're seeing them before they left, or we get teamed up with some other group of people, I don't know how that would work. Anyway, enough with all of the hypotheticals. Let's talk about the actual episode that I watched. So this episode begins with the discovery of the crime scene. It is brutal. I'm not entirely sure if we find out, and I missed it. I don't think we find out exactly how these people were killed. Were they simply left to die? Were they injected with something? Were they shot? Were they some other method? They're definitely still in the wheelchairs that they had been in. It looks like the IV drips are still sitting there next to them. So all of this, like each individual person's situation has not been changed. But the way that we see this team being... And when I say this team, I mean, I am assuming that the team that is discovered dead is the same team that we get a sneak peek at before they're killed here, where there is a girl who is being basically held hostage and has a gun to her head on camera, and this dude is being questioned about, like, when are you from? What is your mission? And finally the guy cracks and says to find you, you sick fuck. And then there's a gunshot sound. Now, I believe that we saw when our team was abducted, there was a moment, if I'm not mistaken, in which Marcy believes that she saw Philip get shot, or is it vice versa? And it turned out that didn't happen. I don't know if that was a result of them maybe being drugged, if that was like a hallucination or a suggestion. I don't exactly remember what it turned out they had done in order to make her think that had happened. But I'm pretty certain it was very convincing at the time. So there was a part of me that when we hear that gunshot sound, I kind of was like, well, we don't know that she was actually shot, though, because we've known them to play tricks before. And then we cut to the construction crew. So this dude comes up to what appears to be the foreman, and it's like, hey, there's flooding in the basement. There's something going on. We got to check this out. And they go and look, and there's water pouring through the concrete of this one wall. And they use a sledgehammer to bust it open. And when they do that, both of them kind of reel back from the smell. And then the camera goes inside, because this area is, I don't want to say like secret, because there's a doorway, but it seems that nobody felt the need to go in there for whatever project they're doing. So it might be locked. It might just have been sort of off limits to them. But the camera goes inside and we see, I think four corpses. And they are all sitting in wheelchairs. And what's the word I want? They're shackled to them. I'll be honest, you guys. I had just started to eat my lunch when I got to this. It was not the best accompaniment to my meal I could have asked for. These corpses are basically beef jerky. They are really desiccated. It's clear they've been there a long time. And it was a gruesome scene. And I can't imagine what people's theories are on what happened here. Because, obviously our team knows what's going on in terms of groups being targeted, and they guess this is, another group of travelers. But if you're one of the general public and you hear about this group of people being discovered who, for all appearances, have no apparent connection to one another, you've got to just be absolutely fucking baffled. And I would love to get a look at what the narrative has been in the media on a discovery like this, because murder is barely front page news a lot of the time anymore, unless somebody was killed in a particularly horrific way, whether that be at the hands of police, like on camera, whether that be, a family member killing a supposed loved one. But somebody getting murdered on the street, mugged, depending on where you're from, that's not really going to be a big story. You find 4 bodies in an otherwise what seemed to be abandoned, manufacturing facility, whatever. And they are handcuffed to their wheelchairs, and there's evidence of them having been intravenously fed something or administered something. And also, I don't remember actually, and I'll have to watch and see, but our like flashback of seeing them before they're killed, they do have that like couple of inches of water on the floor, and our team had that also. I don't know that water is still there anymore. I think that's gone by the time they go in to deal with these bodies. And it is, I would have to think that there is going to be evidence of the fact that the room was flooded, but I don't know how long it's been. I don't know what kind of other like activity has been going on here in terms of animals, or maybe the decay of the bodies could interfere with like, it seems like forensics wasn't able to find very much of anything. According, with the tools that we have at our disposal in our year, they were not able to find anything. McClaren seems to be sort of confident when he brings everybody else in that maybe they'll be able to find something the original team didn't. And it does turn out that there might be something to that. But I'm just extremely, I'm super curious and almost like respectful of the fact that despite how distinctive this like hit apparently was, they didn't seem to leave any evidence behind. And I guess that makes sense because we know that Keith Mars, as I'm going to continue to call him, is nothing if not fucking incredibly precise about how he carries things out. But also, he's not the one out here actually taking care of this. He has people working on his behalf. And I guess he's just managed to find really good help. I wonder if they are also travelers, or if they're just hirelings, or if they have any idea what he's actually doing, or if they care. I would expect they have no idea. He probably just pays them extremely well, and they're just like, yeah, it's a job. It's fine. I don't need to know. But it would add a certain element of interest to me if it turned out that some of them were travelers and were interested in achieving whatever it is that he is after. He has been discovered by the end of this episode. So his whole deal with trying to remain outside of the sight of the director has apparently not worked out. And I don't know. I have so many questions about how this works. So anyway, McClaren is talking to his two colleagues, and forgive me guys, I'm going to warn you right now, because it has been 2.5 months since the last episode, I am going to have forgotten people's names. I remember McClaren, I remember Marcy, I remember Carly, I remember Philip. What's the other one? And then we've got his coworker, the black man who was recently turned into a traveler. And we have the blonde cop who he kept going to for advice, and she did not want to talk to him, whose name I do not remember. And his wife, Catherine. And I remember her. But that is the only one that I can think of right now. I can't remember Sweet Cinnamon Roll Boy, who is an old man in a young boy's body. But yeah, so the McClaren and his three colleagues are talking about what's going on here and the faction. And it's interesting because I had forgotten about this, but McClaren mentions the faction and the fact that it developed after something changed apparently in the future. Because, his colleague says something about the man, says something about how it began in Shelter 41, and the woman says Shelter 41 collapsed. And McClaren has to, let her know, not anymore. That's not what happened in the future that they came from. But then he points out to her that when he told her what was going on, she said that she had seen this kind of thing happening before they ever got here. And the faction did not exist in his timeline. So whatever's going on here, it's not simply due to this new faction. There is some other issue. We know as viewers exactly what it is. We know who Keith Mars is, and that he was like the first one, and we know all of this, but it's really understandable. It would have been understandable, I should say, if they focused on the faction only. And I'm glad that McClaren has the presence of mind to put 2 and 2 together, that isn't as simple as it looks, because it's a really easy thing as an investigator, so I hear, to get sort of attached to a particular story in your head. There's a theory that you decide is likely, and you begin to sort of shape things to fit that theory rather than looking at the actual evidence in front of you. So the fact that McClaren, this idea of this faction existing is very convenient. You know, it's a nice thing to point to be like, oh, that's probably what this is. But I like the fact that he is keeping his head on straight and putting the facts together the way they actually are. The woman says that the director is likely behind it, that she had assumed that's who it was. McClaren says there's no way the director is capable of what we just saw in there. To which the male colleague says, isn't letting it happen just as bad? McClaren does not answer that question. I really wonder what McClaren thinks of this, because he has to know. They've been through enough with the director so far to realize that something's up. Something along the way has sort of shifted, or who knows what. And I would be interested if he were pushed to answer that question, isn't letting it happen just as bad, what McClaren would say, because half of their deal with this mission that they get sent on, and I don't mean this one here, I just mean like in general, is that they have to let bad things happen. That's sort of how things work. So the fact that he says, isn't letting it happen just as bad, about travelers, but he doesn't have that same question about any non-travelers who just exist in this world when travelers know what's about to happen to some of them, I think is very telling. He doesn't see everyone else at the same tier of importance as travelers, which I kind of understand how that could happen. These are your people. You sort of see it that way, that, sorry, I hit my mic. I have something in my eye, so I'm like touching my mic in my eye. I could see sort of categorizing it as us versus them. And the director, you want to believe, if you are a traveler, is meant to look out for you and people like you. And it feels to me like McClaren has really begun to come to terms with the fact that that is not how it actually works. And this dude has arrived recently enough that maybe he just hasn't caught on yet. And McClaren doesn't seem particularly fussed about the fact that he hasn't caught up. He's sort of, there's a vibe to me of how he just straight up ignores that question that to me suggests he'll get there eventually. Like after he sees the things that I have seen and more, he will begin to realize that the director is not necessarily on our side at all. That's not what its function is. So forensics has to take the scene for several hours in order to pack everything up. And we get what I thought was a pretty cool fast forwarded scene of them doing all of the collecting of all of the evidence. And then we cut to Trevor. Oh my God, I'm so glad I remembered his name. Trevor is in the car with his dad, Gary, being driven to school. And his dad is having a really hard time with the fact that Trevor is injured, or so he thinks. Because, of course, he doesn't know about the nanobots. He doesn't know about the future tech and all of this medical help. And so there's this weird scene where his dad is like, don't let it get you down how long this is taking. And Trevor has to comfort him, says, "This must be hard for you." And the dad doesn't seem to hear how messed up this is. He doesn't like, and this is the thing. Okay, so my parents, I would never call either of them a narcissist. But you can be kind of like self-absorbed sometimes without being an outright narcissist. And occasionally this will happen with one of my parents, where when I tell my mom something that's going on with me, there are times where it will turn around and be a conversation about how she's feeling about the thing. And that has sort of happened since I was a kid. It's something that I didn't really see how, like, not appropriate that is until I got older and then began to look at the conversations, especially when you have them on text. I think you can really see the pivot within the conversation in a way that doesn't necessarily happen when you are face to face. And because of the fact that text is screenshotable, I can share it with Owen, or I can share it with like close friends and be like, is this how somebody should react when I tell them that XYZ is going on with me? And I have gotten enough reassurance from friends that it is not how a parent you would think would behave. It's not always like that, but it's a fair amount of the time, to the point that I get sort of irritated and don't want to bring things up to her because I know it's going to be turned around into something about her. And this moment with Trevor is, I think it's meant to showcase to us how caring Trevor is and how like compassionate he is to the fact that he himself is not suffering because he's doing, he got this treatment. And so he is trying to extend support to a man who does actually need it, rather than taking support that he does not need. However, it bothers me on the part of the father that when Trevor says this must be hard for you, his dad doesn't say, it is, but we're talking about you here. It's your body. You're the one who's facing a different future than what you thought. It really bums me out that he doesn't hear how much he made this about him. And it goes on for a while. He tells him, you'll get through it. I know it's going to be a while, but it'll be okay. And when Trevor finally gets out of the car, he says, thanks for the lift, Dad. And there's a moment for Gary of just sitting there. And I think the fact that he called him Dad is a bit of a touching moment. And Trevor walks with this exaggerated wince as he's getting away from the car. And then all of a sudden, we see him pick up the cane and begin jogging. And he goes from this sort of gentle gait to a flat out fucking sprint. This kid is absolutely levitating. It is really something. And I was so delighted because you guys, I was aware that Trevor, the person inside of Trevor now, was someone old who was delighted to be in a new young body again. And I felt really sad that that had been apparently taken away. And I'm so happy to see how much of a complete recovery he has accomplished. And it must be excruciating to have to behave as if he's injured all the time when he's not. I would love to know what the long-term plan is here for, because I imagine with the injury that he has to go back to doctors and get follow-up. I would think imaging, examinations. They're going to have to notice that there's not actually anything wrong with him anymore. I don't know how you cover that up or what you say, And then we cut to Marcy. Marcy has a job as an X-ray tech here. And there is a doctor in her wing that is obviously trying to ask her out. And I love that this dude and David have complete diarrhea of the mouth whenever they're around her. Like, David leaves this message later on, you guys, trying to just, all he wants to do is invite her to dinner with his new ex-girlfriend, Blair. And the awkward phone message is one of those things that it's a kind of a played out joke, right? Like, this is something that you see all the time when somebody's just being weird. There's a really great sort of bit about it in Community where Troy's leaving a message for Abed, and he leaves like 6 different versions of the message in totally different tones of voice and inflection and keeps deleting it and starting over again. And finally, like, Jeff takes his phone away and attempts to leave a message really simply himself, and then second guesses his own message and tries to redo it and winds up in the same circle of deleting and redoing and deleting and redoing that Troy had just been in. So it's not like this is a new joke, but the actor who plays David is so good at the well-intentioned awkwardness. He makes it so believable. And when he finally hangs up, there's a gesture as he hangs up, like it's a desperate motion of him just trying to, like, it's as if somebody else grabbed the phone out of his hand and pressed the button to turn it off before he continued to embarrass himself. It's like he had to suddenly be like, oh my God, what am I doing? And then he says something like, good God, to himself, because he's just so embarrassed and realizes like what that sounded like. I cackled so loud after his good God. Like, it was so well done. Every bit of that was so well done and timed so well. And him plus this doctor, between the two of them, they are super, super into her. And you really get nothing from her. It must be really difficult for this actress to have to play somebody who has not much of a reaction to anything. And that's the point, right? The point is, we reformatted your brain so that you wouldn't die from this like degenerative sort of problem. But in order to do that, we had to delete a pocket of your memories. And there is this assumption that because it's not fundamental foundational memories from her childhood, that it won't be too big a loss. But this does not appear to be something that the coder had attempted to do before. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this seemed like a new procedure. And it appears it had effects that were not foreseen. So I don't know if something about the deletion of those memories like messed with her emotions or messed with her connection to emotion in a way that perhaps it's something that can be, if not reversed exactly, at least like worked through. Perhaps she's just sort of cut off from things a little bit and she needs to reforge these connections. And that seems to be what she's sort of asking when she eventually does come to dinner with David and she talks to him and asks him to tell her about herself. It seems like she is trying to like put pieces together in order to create a fuller picture of herself because she just doesn't know what is supposed to be there. And it was a moment for me of like real sadness. It was just tragic, you know, this idea that she's sitting having dinner with somebody who is trying to tell her how much she meant to them. And she knows she should be having a kind of reaction to this. And she's not. And she can't fake it. She doesn't want to fake it. But she also doesn't understand what happened to her. And he also does not understand what happened to her. They had to lie to him, you know? I just really hate the situation for her so much. And this doctor being into her is the kind of thing that I could see being a real, like, she's so distant, right? Because of the fact that she doesn't really seem to have a connection to anybody. And any ladies out there know that there is just a certain type of dude that they love it when you just don't seem to give a fuck. It's like, for some reason, always to me seemed to be the majority. Guys that can sense you can absolutely take or leave them and you don't care if they are around or not are the ones that become obsessed with you. It's just so frustrating. And the ones that you're actually interested in, it's much more of a challenge, which might be part of why we're into it. But I can't help but wonder if this new version of Marcy that doesn't really give a fuck is, I could see her just being pursued a lot more even than she was before, because she's super hot and aloof as hell. And maybe that's just going to work for her. But she doesn't want it to work for her because she doesn't feel anything for these people. And that's just going to be a real chore. Also, she has an actual job. And this is something that I know people have to do in this world. But I also want to know how they are expected to maintain a job and maintain a life in which they have to bail for these missions at the drop of a hat. You can't work in the kind of field Marcy does. When you work in the medical field, to me, in terms of expectations and hours, it's like working in a restaurant. You are expected to put in a 12-hour shift. You are expected to eat as quickly as humanly possible without taking a full break. You are expected, if somebody calls out and you've done your 12 hours, to do another 8 hours, and you maybe get to come in 2 hours later the next day. It's like that. And I don't see how Marcy can do what she does and then disappear and then just show back up again. And anybody is okay with that. And I guess I'm just going to have to set aside, what I know about how that stuff works and just accept it for the sake of the show. But I won't lie. I was definitely, when they call and are like, Marcy, you need to come right away. A big part of me was like, she's really lucky she was at David's here, because I don't see this working out for her if she's at work. What do you do? Especially since she being an x-ray tech, like there are people with appointments and stuff. Anyway, whole side note, but that's basically what goes on with Marcy this episode. And we get a bit of David alone with Blair, who has an eating disorder, as it turns out. Blair is doing this thing. I don't know how many of you had heard of it. I've known about it. It's one of the few things that I never tried to lose weight because it just sounded so unpleasant. But a lot of women do this, and by a lot, I don't mean like the majority or anything, but it's not entirely uncommon and is, from what I have heard, more popular in like the pageant scene and modeling and that kind of thing, when people are doing much more extreme things to lose weight. You soak cotton balls in juice. So they slide down a little bit easier. They don't taste horrible, but it's just a little bit of a boost of sugar, and that volume fools your body into thinking you're full, when in fact there's no nutritional value there at all. It's part of the same sort of milieu as people who eat way too much fiber, or like a lot of fiber rich food, or psyllium husk capsules sometimes, in an effort to make yourself feel like there's more in your stomach. But I didn't realize that there's a potential for your body to simply not be able to digest that. And it makes sense. I just kind of figured that cotton balls are something that are like small and malleable. And if you are eating, you'll just shit them out and it'll be no big deal. But I guess if you are making it enough of a habit that there isn't other food for your stomach to digest and latch onto, then that would become a problem. And it turns out Blair has been doing this. And it's funny because the scene when we first meet her opens with her saying to David, "Oh, you're cooking a lot more than you used to. You didn't used to cook this much." And I wonder if that's supposed to be linked, that like the fact that he's cooking more is worrying her because of her diet. And so she's started to do this again because of the fact that food has become such a like big component of their relationship. And yeah, when Marcy comes over to the house, it's with the understanding that she's going to have dinner with him and Blair. But then as soon as Blair comes in, Marcy has to bail. And it looks, I'm sure, to Blair as if Marcy is just not like comfortable with meeting his new girl. I think there's a sense of like in the expression on her face of suspicion as to why she suddenly had to run out. Because it's a weird thing to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, something just came up, I have to go," when you haven't actually checked your phone. Nothing occurred that was visible to them to cause her to remember what just came up, you know? So I could definitely, if I were her, I would kind of assume that it was me. And the fact that I had just walked in that had like ruined a moment. And I wonder how Blair's going to deal with that, you know? It's interesting to me, too, that David went back to an ex. Why is that? And he knew about the eating disorder. So I wonder what exactly caused them to come back together. And Blair says a couple of times how different he seems now. That she had used to be able to really read him, and now there's something about him that feels a lot more mysterious and it draws her. And he doesn't seem very into her. You know, it's very clear that he is still in love with Marcy. And I am surprised that Blair is not noticing the lack of connection. To me, it seems pretty obvious. But we've seen how sort of like puppy dog-ish David can be when he loves somebody. And maybe that's what pushed her away from him. And so the fact that they aren't connecting the way they had been, maybe that's exactly what is making him interesting to her now. Maybe she's having the same kind of syndrome that the doctor is having with Marcy, you know? Anyway, so that's what's going on with them. All right, let's talk about Carly real quick, because Carly's, the first time that we see her this episode, she's doing planks with her husband. It's honestly really funny. Guys, planks are so hard. Oh my God. I hate them. And she has this moment where she's late to this, like couples therapy appointment. And the doctor is asking her, I always forget, husband, boyfriend, exactly what the deal is with the fact that it seems like, I can't remember her husband's name. Is it Michael? Michael's her son. Jeff is her husband, right? Jeff says, well, the therapist says, you seem to go out of your way to agree with her a lot. Maybe while she's not here, we can take this opportunity for you to talk about what's going on with yourself. And Jeff says, how much do you know about guilt? And the second he says that, she walks in and apologizes for being late. And I wish so much that I had gotten to hear the rest of that. Because it could go either way. I feel like Jeff has still been very suspicious of whether or not she was fucking somebody else behind his back. But he also nearly killed her. So was he talking about himself feeling guilty? Or was he wondering if she is behaving guiltily? Or, you know, like, what is it that, where was he going with that? I'm dying to know. So, yeah, they put on this show of being the happy couple. And there's an extremely gratifying scene a little bit later on when they are meeting with the I believe, CPS officer, if that is her name, the social worker. And I really appreciated the fact, because they like are making a good show of it. And that's what she says. You're doing very well at keeping up the act. And they try and be like, what do you mean? And she says, come on, guys. I've been doing this a long time. You can't fool me. But the thing is, the fact that it's an act isn't inherently a problem, to be honest. Like, as she puts it, a lot of being married is an act. That's kind of how it goes. So, I don't count that against you automatically. You guys have to do this to a point. And if you're willing to put in the work like this, if you are willing to sit here and put the show on for me and go to your couples counseling sessions and do that, you're making an actual effort. And that's really what being a parent is about, is being willing to make an effort and do the work. And if you're willing to do that, then I think that you're going to make good parents. And it was honestly a great scene. I really liked it. The two of them aren't fooling her. She's not an idiot. But she also sees the value of what they're attempting to do for what it is. They are unified in their interest in getting their son back and taking care of him. And that's really the main thing. I am not happy about Jeff being back in her life, and I do not like where things go at the end of this episode, because the whole point is that he promised he was not going to drink anymore, and then he pops open a bottle of champagne. He tries to claim, I'm doing this to celebrate. I'm trying to thank you. Bitch, if you don't get the fuck up out of here with that shit. Breaking a promise is bad enough. But gaslighting someone into thinking that you're breaking your promise for their own good, the benefit of them, is just beyond the pale. And I mean, Carly's not stupid. She knows exactly what he's doing in that scene. She gives him this look like, are you seriously trying this right now? The answer is, yes, he is. He is seriously trying this right now. And she takes the glass because at this point, the bottle's open, it's poured out, and they just got their kid back, and it's clear that she doesn't want to start a whole thing. But I am extremely concerned about what happens next, because this dude is an alcoholic and an abuser. And what alcoholics and abusers do when they are attempting to fix a wrong is they focus on that one wrong and try to, quote, fix that, and then behave as if it's all over. They don't see the fact that they abused somebody or that they got drunk this time as a pattern of behavior. They see it as an isolated incident that we just need to deal with, and then we can move on, and we can all agree to just forget about it, and we will just do better. It'll be fine. Because the point is, alcoholics do not want to admit that they are alcoholics. Abusers do not see themselves as abusers. So inherently, they can't acknowledge the pattern, or else they would have to see themselves as who they are. And so, this dude, I am assuming, gets his kid back and thinks it's all good now. I bet this is not the last time he drinks. I bet he behaves as if she's being really unreasonable. I bet this ends up in another fight. And I am very worried about where that goes. Because Carly could easily kill him. And killing a cop? I mean, she is a black woman. And I just don't see that going super well for her. Granted, he's also black, but once you're a cop, you detach yourself from, and I don't mean to say that you are not also still a victim of racism, but I'm saying that your identity and the way you see yourself changes, and you begin to identify more with other cops. You know what I mean? And this is all based on accounts that I have read of cops describing their experiences. I'm really worried about what happens here, especially her son being caught up in the middle of this. I mean, he could get really hurt. He could hurt her kid rather than her. I don't know what she does in that case. Like, to a degree, personally, I would love it if the kid was out of the picture because I find the storyline kind of boring. But I know that it would really fuck with her head. And whether or not she defends herself against Jeff and accidentally kills him, I know for a fact if he hurt the child, that is curtains. Like, forget it. I don't see her being able to restrain herself. I don't know. Maybe she regrets it afterward, but that doesn't change what happens in the moment, you know? So, anyway, this concerns me. All right, so let's go. I've talked about everybody individually, pretty much, except for Philip. Philip is the one that is giving me the most kind of eye-rolly vibes right now, because Philip is obviously growing addicted to these eye drops. He is addicted. It's too late. It's happened. And understandably, Trevor's noticing how often he's using them. And Philip can feel Trevor's judgment on that, but is obviously subconsciously aware that he's using them too much. And that is why he lashes out the way that he does in reaction. So it's really tough to watch because there is a scene where he is just tossing shit all over the place. And it turns out he can't find his eye drops, and he assumes Trevor took them in order to make a point. Trevor is just not somebody who lies if he can help it, you know? And so when he comes in and Philip accuses him of taking them, and he says he didn't, I was immediately like, well, then he didn't. Like, it did not even enter my mind. But, of course, Philip has this, like, weird paranoia now. Because he knows that things are not okay. But he has to project that onto something. Because he can't look at why things aren't okay. Not really. And eventually, after kind of wandering around through the wreck, Trevor finds them. And says something like, wow, it's really great how much these are helping you with your addiction, huh? And tosses them to Philip. And Philip doesn't even have a moment of looking abashed or ashamed or sheepish. He just immediately begins to put the eye drops in again. And there is no evidence of reflection that he notices the way he just behaved. He trashed the place halfway, you know, like... and levied this accusation and almost got violent. He was in Trevor's face, ready to start some shit over something that he had fabricated. Not good. I don't like where this is going. And the reason that I say I'm eye-rolly about it is because this broad that turns up last episode and just sort of like reels him in with this eyeball drug, it seemed so clear that she was just meant to be there to like give him the noose to hang himself with. And the fact that she's not even in this episode at all is almost like more insulting. At least if it felt like they were trying to make her a character of some kind. I might not like who she is, but it would maybe be interesting story-wise. But it genuinely feels like she just shows up to be the demon on his shoulder, tapping him and being like, how about trying some of this stuff, buddy? And Trevor asks him whether or not Marcy knows what's in the drops, and she says it's okay. And Philip very brusquely says they're Marcy approved. Can we get back to work now? I don't think that's true, right? He's just saying that. I'm assuming. That's not to say, I don't know. It's the kind of thing that I could see maybe Marcy checks out what's in them and she's like, yeah, be careful with them. And because she says sort of use as needed, she said use as needed. I couldn't tell if he meant Marcy said that or if he meant the girl he got it from said that. I don't know how much he's told them about this girl that he got them from in the first place. I don't know. This just feels a little bit too easy to me and almost like cartoony. She just swoops in to be this bad influence and then disappears. I don't know. So we'll see where that goes. But as of right now, it doesn't feel like Philip has caught on to the fact that he's in a bad way. He doesn't seem to see it, you know? All right. So then let's talk about the main event here. Keith Mars. McClaren, this is a pretty brutal scene, honestly. His team is investigating those 4 bodies, and this woman turns up and is demanding to know where her husband is. And they're like, I'm sorry, he was not one of the 4 people. I don't know why you are getting so in our face about this when he had nothing to do with this. And she doesn't say that he has any connection to any of these people. But of course, McClaren, his ears perk up and he's like, hold on, let me talk to you. And he pulls her aside and she describes how her husband, who had used to be a real loudmouth who smoked too much and didn't give a shit about his health, suddenly, almost overnight, reshifted his priorities and began to do better and become more compassionate and stopped smoking and all this stuff. Of course he's a traveler, right? And I feel so bad because, like, it's one of those things that when you think about a person taking your body, doing way better with it than you were doing, there's something really, like, shameful about that, you know? Like, I can imagine a traveler coming into my body and being like, well, we're going to have to do something about this, and whipping me into shape where I'm not doing that. And watch if I like saw that happening from the outside and I was just like, man, you know, it's part of the privilege of having a body is that you don't have to do anything with it you don't want to do. But it would just bum me out to know, oh yeah, somebody else basically body snatched me and my spouse is way happier with them than they were with me. Ouch, you know? But yeah, so she tells him all of this and then says how he just disappeared. There has been no credit card activity that she can find. She has no idea where he is or what could have happened. And using this guy's name and her name, they manage to, first of all, they try to put a tap on her phone and they discover somebody else has already tapped her phone, which is very sinister. And then they zero in on the guy's comm channel and try to talk to him, and it's rough. There's something about the fact that it's extremely choppy that makes it all the more upsetting, because the guy is like, how did you get on this channel? And then he begins screaming. And I think it's Philip or Trevor that's like, what's happening to him? And McClaren says he's digging the comm out of his head, which is, oh my God, so horrifying. And they go to her house because they assume after they tell this dude, you know your wife's under surveillance, right? Don't you want to help her? As soon as this guy digs the comm out, McClaren's like, he's going to see his wife. Like, clearly. Of course he is. And they go to her house, and sure enough, he's hiding. And he tries to get away from them, darts past them, chasing the whole thing. And they get a hold of him. And it seems like they've got him. And I knew from the way the camera was positioned and the tempo of the words, when he says something like, you have no idea what you guys are getting involved in, I was like, this motherfucker's about to get shot. And sure enough, straight into the fucking lung, like maybe just misses the heart. It's bad. And he winds up dead. But before he dies, he tells them that all of the buildings where because he's been part of a team that was sent to take this guy down in particular. And he says they discovered that all of the buildings where people who were abducted were kept were all owned by the same conglomerate. And McClaren goes to interview the man who owns the conglomerate. And Keith Mars, I mean, you know, we don't like this guy to begin with. We know what he's up to, right? Now, granted, he has been through some shit. Like, I'm not saying that what happened to him originally isn't terrible. And I understand his, like, rage and some of the decisions that he made. But since then, obviously, he has undergone a transformation. And this scene with him and McClaren and how aggressive he is, that was very unexpected. I expected him to do the affable, maybe, I don't want to say like goofy millionaire. He could never pull off goofy. But I thought that he would be friendly and just sort of play up the eccentric bit in that charming way, rather than leaning into the eccentric bit in that suspicious way, which is what he does. And insinuates that he is so high up the chain that he doesn't understand why McClaren's even talking to him. There is just a lot of fucking attitude rolling off of him. It's a pretty good scene, honestly, because of McClaren's, like, the reception that he has to this. Like, this dude, first of all, won't shake his hand, so it doesn't start off on a good foot. And he says, I operate all of my businesses remotely. I never leave this house. My therapist encourages me to be blunt. And here it comes. I'm agoraphobic, germophobic, and I don't like personal contact. And when McClaren says, I'm sorry you have to be here, he says, you don't. You're naturally curious about the wealthy recluse, and your badge gets you in my door. Just please ask your question and get this over with. So McClaren says, you founded this technology firm. Why are you strict about electronics in your home? What is that about? Usual response of protecting my family, cameras everywhere, microphones everywhere, yada, yada, yada. And he asks McClaren, do you have children? And then he says, I'm sure there's still time with you and your wife. And McClaren stops and looks at him. And he looks up and says, I remember now. We met 5 years ago at a charity event. It was before my condition became so debilitating. You were there with your wife, Catherine. And he says something about how she's stunning and give her my best. And I couldn't tell. I am assuming. It was hard for me to know. This guy has to be aware, right? That this is well, he abducted McClaren, didn't he? Or no, wait. Did the whole team get abducted except McClaren? Is that what happened? I'm trying to think back now. I don't remember. But he has to know McClaren's a traveler, right? So was this, it could be one of two things. A, he accidentally let McClaren realize that he knew who he was. Or B, he's trying to threaten his wife and let him know, I know who she is. I know all about you. I can't tell which one of them it was supposed to be. But yeah, it's a sinister moment. And I really liked the interplay between these two and how first, I just really enjoy this character being as threatening as he is without any of the usual posturing of a villain. He doesn't have the like aggressiveness in his movements. It's just in his eyes, you know, it's in the implication of things he says. It's a very interesting way to play it all. Michael says, correct. Everyone except McClaren was abducted. Okay. And I'm assuming that he has to like, it's not because he didn't mean to. This other dude had to be the leader of his team as well, right? And all 4 underlings were, I wonder. Because, yeah, I kind of went into this thinking, oh, he doesn't know who McClaren is. Then I was like, oh, maybe he does. And then I backtracked again. I can't tell. But in the end, they figure out who he is. And they're like, oh, we are going to go and take this motherfucker down. And they are gathered around his home, just about to strike. And the director interrupts both of them. The kid, his son, delivers him a message. Traveler 001. And you are off mission. Stop your pursuit of Traveler 3468 and his team immediately. And stand down or face repercussions is told by a little girl to McClaren's team. And this leads to McClaren deciding that they indeed have to pull back. Although, for her part, Carly is not interested. She thinks that this guy should just be taken out and that is the end of the story. But this guy's son leads to him basically abandoning shop entirely. And, oh, and I forgot to mention, too, that when his team goes to look at the crime scene, the place gets blown up. So when I had said earlier that it seems that he was maybe right about the fact that their technology could have picked up some clues because of whatever advancements they have under their belts, he evidently agreed with them, because otherwise why blow up the scene, you know? And I wonder if that is going to be something that adds like potential terrorists to their list of who could be responsible for this in terms of like the outside view from the FBI. An explosion like that, I feel like, would have to mean that they consider terrorism as a potential motivation. And so then we have this scene with McClaren leaving with this little girl to apparently bring her back to her parent, and passing by a car that has this dude's assistant sitting in it, watching them very threateningly and driving slowly by. And that is the end of the episode. No idea what to think here, guys. What's next? I'm assuming that the billionaire Keith Mars is in the backseat of that car, but you can't see. Who knows? Michael says, makes sense to keep the leader alive. McClaren avoided capture because he wasn't in the same car as the others. Right. So I am out of time. I'm over time. But yeah, I really love the show. I'm really glad to be back, guys. Yay. I hope that these keep coming. And I wanted to let you guys know, I had been looking at a way reduced schedule later in the year because of the wedding, but our wedding had to be postponed until next year due to COVID and due to, Owen's grandmother has cancer and she is going to be undergoing chemo still. So that has opened up a couple of weeks of appointments. I'm still taking time off, but I'm not taking the same amount of time off. So, that should leave some slots that'll be opening up after all. All right. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again, Michael, very much for commissioning this. And I will see you all soon, hopefully with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That an Unspoiled Network podcast.